But I know that if I kept going, you would start going, so I wouldn't do that. You know, my reunion was really good, other than one cousin that was with me briefly when my sister was so ill a year ago. It's been over 60 years since I've seen the rest of them. Naturally, we didn't know each other, by looks anyway. Back then I used to use Prel, now I use Mop and Glow. I've got the 5 B's of old age, baldness, bifocals, bridges, bay window, and bunion. But I'm glad to say that my memory's as good as ever. I cannot remember one thing I've ever forgotten. Today, Romans 15:4 says, whatsoever things are written aforetime are written for our learning. Simply meaning that in the Old Testament, those things written before Paul, they are written for our learning. We, of course, have a covenant that's new. In the Old Testament, that was the Old Covenant. We live under the new. But the principles and the things that were written before are great examples, and they're very, very helpful to us. And so today, living in the modern day world that we live in, I want to tell you something about our government and about the world around us. Government has generally been the enemy of religion. In fact, in 2 Corinthians 11:32, Paul said that at Damascus the governor and the king guarded the city in order to arrest me. You realize that the Christians in the first century were enemies of the state, that is, the Roman government. And many times they suffered persecution, even unto death. Paul himself had been a persecutor and had led Christians to death and to being imprisoned. And so government normally hasn't been. In fact, when Joseph Stalin in 1927 addressed the American labor delegation, here's what he said. We, that is in Russia, we guarantee the right of every citizen to combat by argument, propaganda, and agitation in any and all religion. The Communist Party cannot be neutral toward religion. 2 short years later, there was a night of struggle against religion, and many, many religious believers were arrested, churches were closed, large-scale arrests were made. A woman, Tanya, and whose last name I cannot pronounce, made this statement. She wrote it. You can pray freely, but just so God alone can hear. For writing those lines, she received a 10-year prison sentence. Solzhenitsyn speaks of Christians who went to camp to face torture and death. There were a multitude of Christians, prisoners transported, graveyards. Who will count the millions? They died unknown, casting only in our immediate vicinity a light like a candle. These were the best Christians in Russia. The worst had all trembled, had recanted, and gone into hiding. We need to be thankful that our founding fathers wrote in a constitution that religion was free. You could choose any and not be persecuted because of it. Of course, Satan has never been comfortable with anything that was godlike, and we're at war with Satan. It's not a surprise. In Revelation 12, the Bible talks about war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought with Satan and his angels. Of course, Satan was cast out, and he tried to kill the baby that was being born. In other words, he tried to kill the baby Christ, as we read in the early part of the book of Matthew. And then, since he didn't do that, he made war against the seed of woman, and that's the church. And he's been at war with us ever since. And he hasn't quit. And probably he has more helpers in America today than ever before. A few months back or a few weeks back, I gave you some statistics about Christianity's decline in America, and it continues to decline. There are more atheists, agnostics, and there are more people who it's just an irrelevant issue. They just don't care one way or the other. And so consequently, where do we stand? What do we do? Well, I think that we make a mistake if we go the wrong direction to find the solution. On January the 22nd, 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court, supposedly from the Constitution, created out of whole cloth and out of thin air the right for a woman to kill her baby. Roe versus Wade. January the 22nd, 2015, more than 56 million babies in America have been destroyed in the wombs of their mothers as if they were so much vermin. January 22nd, 1973, the National Right to Life came into being. July the 14th, 2015, a Planned Parenthood doctor discusses the sale of the parts of aborted babies. July the 20th, 2015, there are more than 1.4 million men incarcerated in prisons, jails in the United States. 85% of all the youths sitting in prison grew up in fatherless homes. December 22nd, 2010, the President signed a law to repeal the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law from the American military. Until that date, there had been no official government policy about gays and lesbians in the military. They finally repealed it in 2011. And on May the 21st, 2013, the first full year after the repeal, the military suffers a wave of gay sex assaults. And there are other statements I don't want to even deal with. December 13th, 2013, an activist federal judge ruled that polygamy is now essentially legal in the United States. U.S. District Judge Clark Waldups recklessly decided that reality TV stars Cody Brown and his 4 wives, quote, could not be prosecuted for polygamy, even though the Utah law against the practice is the strongest in the nation. June 26, 2015, a divided Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision that same-sex couples nationwide have the constitutional right to marry. July 27, 2015, bowing to pressure from gay rights groups, the Boy Scouts of America voted to end its long-standing ban on openly gay scout leaders. August 1st, 2015, divorce rate is about 50% in America. Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? Well, there's some answers. I said a while ago that Romans 15:4 said, whatever things are written aforetime are written for our learning. Joshua 23, you remember Joshua succeeded Moses as the leader of the great army of Israelites who had come from Egypt across the desert for 40 years, crossed the Jordan, gone into the land, and now Joshua's their leader. And he said in chapter 23, near the end of his life, Jehovah your God, he it is that fights for you. 1 Chronicles 5:22, the war was of God. 2 Chronicles 32:8, but with us is Jehovah our God to help us and to fight our battles. 2 Chronicles 20:15, the battle is not yours, but Jehovah's. 1 Samuel 17:47, the battle is Jehovah, and he'll give you into my hand. You know who made that statement? David, as he was approaching the battle with Goliath. In fact, in verse 37, when he was trying to explain to his brothers why he felt comfortable going out with no armor, only a sling, against the giant Goliath, he said, when he was a shepherd, the God that delivered me from the paw of the bear and the paw of the lion, he will deliver me from this Philistine. Did he? I'd like to have been there. Wow. And then he said in verse 47, the battle is Jehovah's, and he will give you, Goliath, into my hand. And he did. Well, in 2 Chronicles 20, if you want to go there with me, that's in the Old Testament now. I have to be facetious every once in a while. You'd wonder what happened. 2 Chronicles 20. We need to remember that we're really not in this battle with Satan alone. In 1 Peter 5:8, Peter said, be sober, be vigilant. Your adversary, the devil, is a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour, but resist him. But be strong in the faith and resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. So we can resist. He cannot harm us when we resist against him. And so consequently, this passage, this section of 2 Chronicles was very, very interesting to me because Jehoshaphat the king got word that a combined army was on their way to attack them. And he knew they were vastly outnumbered. And he knew that there was nothing they could do. And so what he did, he called all the people together in Jerusalem. And he had them gather out and he began to speak to them. And he talked about the fact that he stood up in the assembly of Judah and Jerusalem in the house of Jehovah before the new court. And he said, O Jehovah, the God of our fathers, are you not God in heaven? Are you not ruler over all the kingdoms of the nations? And in your hand is power and might, so that none was able to withstand thee. And he went on and talked about the fact that he called on God, they prayed, they fasted, they trusted God, and he told the people, the battle's not yours, it's Jehovah's. God did help them. He gave instructions to Jehoshaphat. Now you tell all the people that when the enemy approaches, you gather together and you march out to face them, but don't fight. Stand and see me. Well, they walked out, and here came that army, and they began singing. And when they did, the two armies, and there was a third that had kind of gotten into the picture somehow, and they, in the confusion of battle, turned against one another and destroyed one another to the last man. And Israel didn't lift a finger. But the thing that made the difference was when Jehoshaphat was speaking to them, God said, tell them to believe. Trust me. Do what I say. Because the battle's not yours. It's mine. It still is, folks. Let's not try to turn some trust in horses, some in chariots, an Old Testament statement. But we'll trust in Jehovah. Solomon, supposedly the wisest man that ever lived. And I trust that he was wise. In fact, not only his wealth, but his wisdom was world-renowned. When the Queen of Sheba came to visit him, looking at all that was around and talking with him, she went back to her home country and said the half has not been told. And yet Solomon, because he was surrounded by enemies, made alliances with those countries. And one of the alliances he made had women in it that were not following God, and he married those strange women. And this wise man that God had trusted and had given him to be ruler over, and he'd been very successful in his ruling, the Bible says that they turned his heart away from God. Sad story. They turned his heart away from God. That great man. I tell you, when I found out he had 300 wives and 700 concubines, I thought, doesn't sound very smart to me. But I remember seeing a movie when I was a teenager about World War II, about a tank crew that was stranded in the Sahara Desert and had been surrounded by the German troops. And along with them was a man from one of the Islamic countries, a great big husky guy in the military. And they finally found a little place that they hoped was a well, and it was dry. But they went down into it and they found that there was a little trickle. And this older gentleman, the Mohammedan, was talking to the sergeant who was in charge. And he said, in your religion, you can have more than one wife. He said, oh, yeah. And he said, how many do you have? He said, one. And he asked the American, how many do you have? He said, one. I laughed at that because I thought, God's plan's right, even though they had the right to marry. This man's smart enough to say, I'm not going to do that. So you see, we live where we are bombarded with information from every possible technological advance. Not me. Mary and I have smartphones. We're engaged in the battle of wits with them, and they're winning. And so I use part of what's available. I'm thankful, don't misunderstand me. And let me say this about modern technology. It is a tremendous way, if used properly, to spread the gospel. So any good thing that comes along, somebody will find a way to pervert it and twist it and make it evil, won't they? And so the fact that technology is here doesn't make it wrong. But we need to recognize that we are bombarded with information, and 99 and 44, 100% of it is garbage. It is not true, and we need to be very careful. You know, the reality shows are so popular now. I live in reality. I don't live in a fantasy world, and I don't particularly need that. I don't like that kind of a show. I don't watch them. There was one that I enjoyed about the guy from Australia that was the crocodile hunter. That was exciting because it was true, and it was something that we could identify with that was fine, nothing evil about it. But the fact is, are we going to be swayed by what the world says? And are we going to try to find alternative ways to survive this situation that we live in and the impending worse and worse situation? Or are we going to trust God? Remember, the battle's not yours. It's Jehovah's. Amen. We're going to sing an invitation song. You know why. It's not just because we've always done it. It's not just because it's a tradition that we can't break. We could if we wanted to. But it makes sense because every time words from God are preached, we trust that some hearts are touched. And if in the hearing of these words you feel the need to trust God more and let Him be your battler for you, or whatever need you may have, make it known while together we stand and sing.